Welcome to another presentation of the Globe Sound Healing Conference. We now have Anthony Holland. Hi, Anthony.
Hi, how are you, David?
Great. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
Anthony Holland is president of the nonprofit company Novo Biotronics, dedicated to researching destructive resonant frequencies against cancer and pathogenic bacteria. His TEDx talk on Shattering Cancer has been seen by over 14 million people. It's at www.resonantlight.com/Anthony-Holland. Although if you just do a search for Anthony Holland or TED Talk, you'll find it. What have you been up to lately?
Well, we moved down to Florida in 2022, and we are currently running a fundraiser to try to build a new research lab down here in Ocala, Florida.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, here's the big question. If you had all the money in the world, what would you do to help people on the planet?
Well, from the perspective of the research that I've been doing with this device, which is sometimes known as a Rife Bear plasma device, I would certainly continue the cancer research we've been doing since about 2009, but really greatly expand it. For example, one of the challenges is, we've been able to work with cells in vitro in small plastic dishes, which is always the first step in cancer research. But we often receive questions from people, why aren't you, treating patients? Or maybe the step before that, why aren't you working with animals, test with mice with cancer or something like that? So I can think of two things I would do. One would be to establish, so we have all the money in the world, is that right? No.
Yep.
This is great. So I would establish research centers all around the world in every country and many major cities where we would continue to seek out the most effective frequencies against cancer. We would certainly apply for FDA approval. Now that's in the tens of millions of dollars, which explains why our small company hasn't been able to do that. We would hire all kinds of scientists who are experts in dealing with animals and cancer, and we would proof and test the technology first, of course, with animals, and then eventually, hopefully, with people. We would like to see that someday, in a great dream in the future, expand to clinics all over the world. And as I mentioned in my TED Talk, my dream, ever since I first was told in 2009 when I visited a major cancer research center on the East Coast, they told me, there are some kinds of leukemia which are untreatable and are fatal to children. And I was really shocked. I didn't know that at the time. And since then, it was really my dream to keep working on finding frequencies that would destroy cancerous leukemia cells. And I was dreaming in my TED Talk, and still today, of cancer treatment rooms of the future where the children don't even know they have cancer. Maybe their doctor did a test and they told the mother, he needs to come to this center. And they don't have any chemo, no dangerous toxic drugs. They don't have to have any needles or anything like that. They just go to a room, they meet new friends. It's a pretty large room. It's a new treatment center of the future. And in the ceiling above are all these plasma lights, which we use in our experiments in our lab. And they are emanating pulsing electric fields, which are slowly eliminating their cancer cells. So that's one of my dreams, would be to establish that kind of cancer treatment center in the future, which is painless, non-toxic, non-invasive, and inexpensive. Just turn on the switch and you need a little electricity for that. A second dream I would have, I've been very, very interested since I began this research, and since I shattered the very first microorganisms that I tried in 2007, and I documented that on video, and I thought, these little organisms remind me of the organisms that cause malaria, which is a problem all over the world. Sadly, even here in Florida, they said malaria was starting up again. A very alarming situation. I have a very strong feeling if somehow I could be supplied with or work with another scientist who's an expert in malaria, if I could get blood samples of a patient, or perhaps we'd start with mice, because there's the type of rodent malaria would be a first step, which is not contagious to humans, is my understanding. I would love to find a scientist who works with rodent malaria and would send regular blood samples to our research lab. And I am convinced we could shatter the malaria parasite that causes the disease. And if we could document that as a test case, we might be talking about future malaria treatments all over the world where people come in with portable electronic setups. They wouldn't have to be terribly large, and you could treat an entire large group of people, maybe a town or a village or something, all at once. So that's one of my dreams, that this technology could be used against cancer on a global scale, that it could be used against malaria. And also we did some experiments with pathogenic bacteria in a microbiology lab around 2010 and 11. And there are a number of dangerous bacteria. MRSA is one of them, MRSA, where people, if they're infected by this bacteria, it's very resistant to antibiotics. And a lot of these bacteria are endemic in today's hospitals. You might go in for your appendix, but then you come out with a MRSA infection. It's a very, very serious problem. And the antibiotics are not working. They're antibiotic resistant. We did preliminary testing that showed that this technology essentially eliminates antibiotic resistance in these dangerous bacteria. And this would be the third leg. Let's go into the hospitals and make sure every hospital has a device which can easily electronically eliminate antibiotic resistance in these dangerous organisms, and the patients can stop worrying about contracting these terrible diseases. So a sort of three-leg global solution in the dream of dreams.
Well, really, what we're talking about is every pathogen. I mean, every virus, right? Every bacteria, every bad cancer cell. I mean, what we're talking about is a massive change in the whole medical system. And I don't think you need all the money in the world at all. And I think there's absolutely someone out there ready to fund all of this right now.
Well, that would be wonderful. Now, in regards to viruses, when the COVID outbreak happened, I received quite a bit of email from people. Would our technology be able to destroy the COVID virus? And I have to say, I think it's possible. Theoretically, I think it's quite possible, because I think any organism, we can eventually, with enough time and the right technology, we could find a frequency which would resonate in that organism or some part of it and probably destroy it or disable it. But we, of course, we have not worked with viruses. That requires a special laboratory, what they call a BSL-4 lab. I think there are only 6 of those in the United States or something. They're government controlled. You know, you have to be really, really careful. You're going to work with a dangerous virus. So I would say theoretically, I do think it's possible. I have read some scientific papers where they used lasers of specific frequencies to disable or destroy a virus. And so I see signs that it could be doable with the right technology. Right now, of course, our little research company is not able to do that.
Right, right. I mean, we'll talk more after your presentation. Tell us about your presentation coming up.
Okay, thanks. We're going to see in this video, first of all, we're going to see cancer cells being shattered. We filmed through the microscope, and you're going to see leukemia cells and other types of cancer cells actually being literally blown into little bits using only our electronic signals. And that's going to be all fleshed out and explained. You're going to see a list of frequencies which we have found to which different types of cancers are vulnerable. And that means if you use this frequency, at least with our particular electronics we have in our research lab, you can slow down the growth rate of the cancer. And in many cases, you do literally shatter and destroy the cancer cells. So we're going to share with you a list of frequencies which have been shown through our research and also the research of some other companies and other scientists who are doing similar kinds of work, but with a little different technology. So we'll see lists of frequencies that are effective. We're going to have a visit to our upstate New York Novo Biotronics Research Laboratory. We were very fortunate. A lot of people around the world donated years ago to help us build and equip that lab. It was very successful. We were able to do hundreds and hundreds of hours of experiments, and people would like to see, what did the lab look like? What did you do there? And so on. So you're going to get to see exactly what we did and what the lab looked like. And I think just general, there's going to be some commentary in there about what is a resonant frequency, and then what is a destructive resonant frequency, with a little demonstration.
Great. Let's check it out, and then we'll talk more afterwards.
Thank you.
Okay, here we go.
Millions of people around the world have seen my TED Talk on shattering cancer, and millions have embraced our dream of a new future cancer treatment. I now believe that the future cancer treatment rooms for children will be a very different place. It will be a pleasant place where children gather and make new friends. They probably won't even know they're sick. They'll draw pictures, color in their books, play with their toys, all the while unaware that above them are beautiful blue pinkish plasma lights emanating healing, pulsing electric fields, shattering their cancer painlessly and non-toxically, one cell at a time. Thank you. Thanks to you, we had the most unique cancer research lab in the world. We performed thousands of hours of experiments, searching for the most effective frequencies against cancer. The pulsed electric fields from our plasma tubes are uniquely suited to destroying cancers of the blood, lymphatic system, or cancers that can be widely spread. Here are some of the results. Leukemia cell number 1 tries to grow a copy of itself, but the new cell is shattered into dozens of fragments and scattered across the slide. Leukemia cell number 2 then hyperinflates and also dies. Leukemia cell number 3 then tries to make another cancer cell. The new cell is shattered and the original cell dies. I've dedicated 16 years of my life to studying this incredible phenomenon, and I hope to spend many more years continuing this vital research work. We've tested this technology against cancer cells and against dangerous pathogenic bacteria, and time after time it has proven to be effective, bolstering our faith in this new approach. Welcome to the Novo Biotronics Research Laboratory. After donning a lab coat, special safety glasses, and gloves, we're ready for a new lab session. The first step in a lab session is to clean all surfaces very carefully with 70% isopropyl or ethanol alcohol. We clean all laboratory bench tops, and we clean the entire outside of the incubator, sterilizing all surfaces in the lab before beginning our lab work for that session. Here we're turning on the biosafety cabinet. All work is done in the biosafety cabinet. It provides a laminar flow type environment with special airflow to protect the work you're doing and to protect the lab worker. We also have to sterilize all surfaces inside the biosafety cabinet with 70% ethanol or isopropyl alcohol. We go through this antiseptic procedure at the beginning and end of every lab session at Novo Biotronics. Lab safety is number one, and protecting our work, our research work, and keeping it free from contamination is the next most and very important aspect of working in the lab. Now that we've sterilized all the working surfaces in the laboratory, we are going to sterilize all the equipment that's going to go into the biosafety cabinet. Here you can see I'm cleaning some special dye that's used to count cancer cells. We're cleaning a little rack that will hold micro centrifuge tubes, and we'll put cancer cells in those tubes to count them. Here's a pipette stand, and we're going to clean also the pipettes. Everything is treated antiseptically to prevent contamination during the research work. All of the equipment you're seeing in our research laboratory was made possible through donations from people from all over the world supporting our important work against cancer. Now you'll see me cleaning glass sterile pipette tips. They're wrapped in a special paper and plastic wrapping and are sterilized at the factory, but we also antiseptically treat the outside packaging. So anything that goes into the biosafety cabinet has been carefully sterilized with ethanol or isopropyl alcohol. Now you'll see some of the electronics on the bench top in our lab. Here you see the microscope on the right with cancer cells sitting on it. And on the left you can see a plasma tube. There's our frequency generator, 197,650 Hertz, operating at 30.5 amps. That's our DC power supply. There's our OM2 special RF transmitter. This is an impedance matching device tuner. You can see we get an indication of power levels in watts. And here you can see a lit plasma tube. This is a special plasma tube called a super tube. And here is a close-up of the cancer cells sitting on the microscope being treated by the plasma tube. Here you get some sense of distance from the plasma tube to the microscope. We do keep careful track of the distance and power levels of all treatments. Here you're seeing wires to a custom heated microscope stage, and this is a special fiber optic lighting device that provides lighting through the microscope that does not heat the cells at all. And over here we have a PC computer running a program which reads all the frequencies inside our electronic signals so we can check them. Now I will go over to the microscope. I have turned off the plasma light, and we're going to take the little flask with the cancer cells, sterilize the outside of the flask, and bring it into the biosafety cabinet as we prepare to do an assay counting how many cancer cells survived and how many were destroyed by the plasma treatment. Now you'll see the process of counting cancer cells, doing an assay. First we swirl the flask around. Of course the flask has been already sterilized. And we're going to take a pipette tip here, sterile glass pipette. We're going to insert it into the electric pipette head. It's a little pump that moves liquids up and down. Everything is done in a sterile fashion. Now with one hand, I'll remove the top of the flask with the cancer cells and insert the sterile pipette. And if you watch my right hand, and if you look carefully at the glass pipette tip, you'll see the liquid with the cancer cells moving up and down. So we will mix that liquid several times to get a good homogeneous mix of cancer cells in the liquid media, and then we'll extract a small portion and put that into a microcentrifuge tube. Here I am mixing once more in the microcentrifuge tube about a half a milliliter of liquid with cancer cells. And now we're going to extract 100 microliters and put that into another small tube. We're going to add to that 100 microliters of trypan blue. This is a special dye that will tell us which cancer cells are alive and which were killed by our electronic pulsed electric fields. Then we mix the trypan blue briefly and extract 10 microliters, just a drop or two. It goes onto a special slide called a hemocytometer. And now we go over to the microscope. If you look at the stage of the microscope, you can see the small slide there, and you can even see some blue coloring. And now I turn on the fiber optic lighting on the microscope and adjust the slide. It's a special slide called a hemocytometer. It's marked with special grids, microscopic grids, and we count the cells in the grids, and we are able to calculate the percentage of living cancer cells versus dead cancer cells. So this is called an assay. Now I have a little counter in my left hand, and while looking through the microscope, I will be clicking on that counter, counting the number of living and dead cells, and I write it down on a small piece of paper in the lab, and that data is later transferred to our official laboratory research notebooks. Here I am turning on the plasma light to continue the experiment, additional electronic treatment of the cancer cells. Now that the cancer cells are back on the microscope, being treated with more pulsed electric fields, it's time to clean up the biosafety cabinet. We're going to close up our supplies. We're going to sterilize them all once more, treat them antiseptically. In the same way we did before the work, we do the same kind of antiseptic cleaning after, and we clean every item that was in the biosafety cabinet while we were performing the cell assay work. Here you can see me removing the pipettes from the biosafety cabinet, cleaning the pipette holder, and antiseptically cleaning all the pipettes. So all the equipment is cleaned both before and after every cell assay. It's very detailed work, but has to be done every time to assure accuracy in the research work that we are doing. At the end of the work, all surfaces are treated aseptically again, and an ultraviolet light is run for an hour inside the biosafety cabinet. We hope you enjoyed this visit to the Novo Biotronics Research Laboratory. Every year, we are performing hundreds of hours of research experiments in an effort to find the most effective frequencies against cancer. Help us change the future of cancer treatment. Go to the link on your screen today and please donate to our research work. I have here two identical tuning forks, both tuned to the note A, the note an orchestra tunes to. These forks are both made to vibrate 440 times per second. We say their frequency is 440 hertz. If I tap this fork, putting little pulses of energy into it, the second fork will also vibrate in sympathy. And if I silence this fork, we just may hear the other singing its tone. We say that I'm inducing a sympathetic resonant vibration in the second fork. It only works because both forks are tuned to the exact same frequency. Now, many of us have seen this very charming young man on the internet who shatters crystal glasses with his powerful voice. But if you watch him carefully, you'll see that first he taps the glass with his finger and listens. The glass sings its natural resonant pitch. Then he takes a deep breath and sings a loud, long note. He induces a resonant vibration in the crystal glass. The vibration grows larger and larger and larger until the glass is shattered. On the other end of the scale, we have a giant bridge made out of concrete and steel, a suspension bridge, the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. Cars and trucks and buses are going over it every day. And unfortunately, where they built this bridge, there was a steady wind blowing across it. And one day this wind induces a small vibration in the bridge, hardly noticeable. But the frequency of the vibration matches the resonant frequency of some part of the bridge. And the vibration gets larger and larger and larger until the bridge collapses into the river below. A destructive resonant frequency. So on one end of the scale, we have a giant concrete and steel bridge destroyed by resonance. And on the other, we have a small crystal glass shattered. So maybe we could shatter something even smaller, something really small, something you would need a microscope to see. Maybe we could shatter a living microorganism. And the hunt begins through a microscope for a frequency which will shatter a living microorganism. Now, we have a method of controlling Dr. Baer's device by an input control frequency. So if I put in, say, 100 hertz, out will come 100 pulses per second. If I put in 200 hertz, we'll get 200 pulses. So now we're searching for the magic frequency. And we start with 100 hertz, and we look through the microscope to see if anything's happening. We watch for 5 minutes. Nothing happens. So we try 101 hertz. We look through the scope for 5 minutes, and nothing happens. So we try 102, 103, and so on. Over the course of 15 months, we try hundreds and hundreds of frequencies, if not thousands, until we find the magic combination. The answer is you have to have two input frequencies, one low, one high, and the higher frequency must be 11 times the lower. It's what we musicians would call the 11th harmonic. And when we add the 11th harmonic, we begin to shatter microorganisms like a crystal glass. These are the first videos taken. We showed these videos to our friends in the biology department. They said they hadn't seen anything quite like it. Seems to be a new phenomenon. These organisms are being shattered by our electronic signals. This is a harmless organism, almost friendly, a little blepharisma. And normally they're very fast swimmers, but when you approach a frequency to which they are vulnerable, they begin to slow down, then they stop, and then they begin to disintegrate within about 3 minutes. And about this time, we meet a cancer researcher, and we show them these videos. And this results in an invitation to spend 4 months in a cancer research lab trying to shatter cancer cells. This is our setup in the lab. You can see the microscope with cancer cells on it. Here's the plasma tube, and here's my little frequency control box. So first we attack pancreatic cancer. Take a good look at this slide, because the next one will look quite different. After we treat these cells, they change their shape and size, and they begin to grow long, rope-like structures out the sides. They look something like antennas. I call them bioantennas, for biological antennas. It's as if the cancer cells are trying to tune in to our signal. It also turns out this is the beginning of a process of destruction for cancer cells. We now know that cancer is vulnerable between the frequencies of 100,000 hertz and 300,000 hertz. Hi, this is Anthony Holland, and we're going to look at a very important video produced by Novo Biotronics. The video shows some of our original work with leukemia cells and also shows some very, very important new work accomplished in the past year, also with leukemia cells. Let's begin by taking a look at this picture. This is the beginning of our video. These are human leukemia cells, a cancerous type of blood cell. The typical leukemia cell is here. It's just a round little sphere or globe shape. So you can see we have many normal looking leukemia cells as seen here under the microscope. These are all pretty healthy looking leukemia cells because they look nice and round. Now when I start the video, you're going to see that this cell, cell number 1, is going to try to make a copy of itself, what they call a daughter cell. The cancer is attempting to replicate itself, But because we are hitting the cells with our pulsing electric fields, you're going to see that the cell will be prevented. So let's run the video. And you can see a daughter cell tries to emerge here, but instead the new cell is immediately shattered by our electric fields. If I let the video continue, you'll see that the new cell is broken into many, many tiny pieces or fragments. I'm pausing the video from time to time. Now you can see the cell is just shattered into many fragments, and those fragments are now going to be pushed away. They're going to separate and disperse. The cell is not only destroyed, it's dispersed across the slide. Let's take a look now at this cell in the middle. Another leukemia cell also tries to divide. I've stopped the video, and for a brief moment you can see that a new cell is trying to emerge, but already there's some fragmentation. Now as I start the video, you'll see the new cell is sucked back into the original, and the original cell is actually destroyed. And if you look carefully, you see that the contents of the cell have all been pushed to one side. You see how it's very clear looking here, and here there's more material. So this cell was stopped from duplicating, so was this cell, and this cell is actually destroyed. Let's go to cell number 3. It tries to make a daughter cell. We freeze the motion for a second. You begin to see fragments emerging. The daughter cell can't really take shape. And once again, the new cell is broken into many fragments and destroyed. This is a type of process we're seeing using our pulsing electric fields in our laboratory at Novo Biotronics. It's an amazing phenomenon that's new in the world of cancer research, and we say we are literally shattering the cancer cells. And now we go on to the latest cutting-edge video from our lab. Now here you're seeing once again leukemia cells, but this time we're going to see an experiment that ran for 24 hours. You can see here typical round leukemia cells, and this is under the microscope, of course. And what we do is we take a photograph every 3 minutes, and then we play back those photos very quickly, and it makes a very interesting video that shows the real phenomenon that's going on in our lab experiments. So if you look at this screen, you can see some very nicely round, normal leukemia cells here with the mouse cursor showing you, right? But also you can see that some cells have already begun to experience fragmentation. Look down here, for example. Something's happening, and the texture of the cell doesn't look right either. It looks kind of bubbly. Elsewhere in the picture, you can see little fragments. That's probably a piece of a cell that broke off. Here are some fragments. Here's some kind of contents that came out of a cell onto the slide. Here's a cell that has all the wrong shapes, so that's probably more like the contents of some cell that was ejected. Here's a cell undergoing some kind of transformation. So already you can begin to recognize the difference between round, full, so-called healthy leukemia cells, and then cells which are undergoing some level of destruction. Something's ejecting out of the cell, or we're seeing little fragments everywhere, or the surface of the cell is bubbling up, and so on. Now let's start the video and watch some of it. You notice that the cells are moving. The cells do move around. But more interesting and more important is to look very carefully at all the tiny particles. As you watch the video, you'll see many, many tiny particles of cells. And over the course of this 24-hour experiment, the number of particles increases dramatically. It means there's a huge amount of cellular debris being generated in our experiments because we are shattering the cells into fragments. Let's freeze frame for a minute. Here you can see fragments forming. Here are fragments, and here and here. All these cells are ejecting their contents or being fragmented. Here cells' contents are being badly distorted, and many, many little tiny pieces of cells, which means somewhere above the picture here, cells are being shattered. If you try to focus on a group, like if you look over here or over here and you watch it over time, you'll see a major transformation. You see lots of little tiny fragments will gather almost as if they're little satellites orbiting a planet. That's a common effect we've seen. It's part of the fragmentation process. Here you can see lots of fragmenting and the cell going through crazy gyrations. Sometimes these fragmenting cells rapidly move through the picture, and here are more. There's so much destruction going on in this video that even scientists who work with cancer every day don't really recognize it because there's nothing like it that can destroy cancer cells this quickly and this dramatically. Look at this large cluster in here, another group being shattered, and many, many fragments. Notice the tremendous increase in fragments. Right here you have this classic group of fragments around a larger sphere. This is a classic presentation of the shattering effect of our pulsing electric fields. You can study these and see if they are dispersed, see how much of the cell is destroyed. Here's a cell's really completely destroyed now, lost its shape, it's shattered into fragments. Let's back up a little bit now and watch some more of that video. Look at the tremendous amount of cellular debris from the beginning of this section of the video. Let me just back it up a little bit. You see there's not too much cellular debris, but as the video progresses, there's more and more and more. Also notice you have quite a few round cancer cells in the beginning of the experiment. Not all, some cells are already undergoing some transformation from the early electrical pulses, which probably started 10 or 15 minutes before we started the video. But you have a lot of pretty normal round cancer cells, and by the end of the video, there's just a massive amount of destruction and fragmentation. Here's something very dramatic happening up in the right-hand corner. These cells are going through dramatic gyrations and fragmentation. It's like we're torturing the cancer cells. Here are two which are both shattering. Another group of shattering cells here and here and here and here and over here. It's absolutely amazing how many cells are shattered into fragments with these pulsing electric fields. You can play the video over and over and over and watch different groups and see how they move and how much they're shattered. It's just a phenomenal experience to see all these cancer cells being shattered. Now we're going to see a series of still photos that I took during the experiment in which I concentrated the camera on specific cells which had shown very dramatic fragmentation. So this is obviously, of course, this cell is being destroyed. Here's a piece of a cell, but this region right in here, here you see a normal cancer cell, but here, this cell was destroyed completely, and there must have been more than one cell because there's so many fragments. Again, this is a phenomenon that even cancer experts who look under the microscope every day and are doing experiments, they do not see this level of destruction, so they actually have difficulty recognizing it. That's why I'm making this video. I've been watching this now for several years in our experiments, and I thought we've got to show people what's happening. So massive fragmentation, and look at all these little fragments here. Here's a cell that's destroyed. I'm going to stop it for a second. You see fragments all over the place. Then you see hollow cells where the internal components of the cell were crushed against the side of the cell wall. Here they were crushed to the side and so on. Let's go forward. Look at this massive fragmentation, and up here and here, over here. Massive numbers of fragmented cells. Look at that, almost completely hollow, and inside what's left of the cell, little tiny fragments. All of this is destruction. All these little fragments you see everywhere. Here's the classic, many little sort of orbiting fragments around a larger cell. Here it's starting to do that. Here there's destruction. Here that cell's been destroyed. A field of debris, a field of destruction, which almost nobody even knows what it is because it's such a unique and amazing phenomenon. Look at this. Look at all the fragments everywhere. There's a dead cell. Now you can begin to recognize it. There's a pretty normal round cell. There's a pretty normal round one. And here, not so normal. The color's wrong, the texture's wrong, the internal contents of the cell are all jammed to one side, fragments here, here, and here. It's really unbelievable. For cancer scientists who have seen cancer cells be destroyed by other methods, they don't know what this is. They have not seen a level of destruction like we see in our experiments using our pulsing electric fields, frequency-specific pulsed electric fields. Again, by freeze, look at this, another hollow cell, maybe the contents has been pushed out, a dead cell, fragmented, dead cells here, here, up here, over here, on the way of being destroyed here, another dead one here, fragments, just massive level of destruction. Now I'm sure you already can recognize, you could freeze this video and spot for yourself. Look at this terrible cell which is all destroyed, and here in the fragments, and another dead one and another one. You yourself now will become an expert in spotting this new kind of destruction of cancer cells never before seen. This is a great photo here where this is a classic. You often see this in a type of cell destruction known as apoptosis. When cells are in really deep trouble, they actually will commit suicide, a type of cell suicide. It's called apoptosis. They kill themselves. And when they do that, it looks a little bit like this. You see this hollow cellular structure, and everything's jammed to one side. Often they call these, in other cancer research, they'll call these kind of fragments that emerge around a cell, maybe like this, as a kind of blebbing, or here's an example of blebbing perhaps. Or inside this cell here, we see little round things they call blebs. And blebbing is a sign of apoptosis. But our destructive effects go far beyond just blebbing, because we will see these massive numbers of shattered cells and many fragments. But here's a classic kind of apoptosis look, where you see like a hollow cell and all the material inside has been jammed to one side. These cells are dead, certainly very badly damaged. Look at that overall screen. The number of fragments from destroyed cells is really incredible. More cellular fragments. Here's that orbiting effect. Look at this. It's a massive. Look at all the debris on here and dead cells everywhere, all over the screen. Incredible. Sometimes you get anomalous shapes while they're sort of struggling against the electric fields. And of course, some cells are surviving. But we have assayed or counted in our laboratory experiments up to 60% of destruction of leukemia cells. And you begin to see that visually. If you look at this screen, you say, well, look at this. There are quite a number of cells destroyed and fragmented and hollow and not looking very happy as leukemia cells. And you begin to see, wow, there's probably 30-40% of these cells are already dead in the experiment. Fantastic. Look at these strange anomalies of the cells that happen caused by the pulsing electric fields. Again, traditional oncologists and cancer researchers have never seen anything like it. When they see this video without this narration, they have no idea what they're looking at, really. Massive fragmentation, massive destruction of leukemia cells. No chemicals were used, no chemotherapy, no radiation. This is done with pulsing electric fields. Electric fields are now being approved by the Food and Drug Administration in some forms for treatment for cancer. There are companies which have approved treatments using electric fields to destroy cancer cells. It not only destroys them, it stops them from dividing, and it causes tumors to shrink. More individual photos taken during a 24-hour experiment against a cancerous leukemia, a type of blood cancer. Difficult to treat because it circulates throughout the body, but our experiments seem to indicate it could be scaled up for projecting the pulsing electric fields over an entire patient's body at some time in the future. We are very, very hopeful that these experiments will lead to a new kind of cancer treatment which is not toxic to the patient, will not make the patient sicker than they already are, which is non-invasive. You don't have to inject anything or stick any needles in anybody. All this destruction you're seeing of these dead, fragmented cancer cells is caused by a special kind of light called a plasma light that projects frequency-specific pulsing electric fields. In the future, we believe people will be treated with these special pulsing electric fields for cancer. It will be painless, non-toxic, and slowly destroy their cancer cells. So now we're going to play the entire video for you from beginning to end without the narration, because now you know what to look for and you can recognize the massive scale of destruction which we have discovered in our laboratory experiments at Novo Biotronics. And now here is the entire video. It's about 4 minutes long from beginning to end without my narration. Thank you for watching and listening. If you find this work valuable and important and wish to support it, please help us and go today to our website, novobiotronics.com, and there you'll find an opportunity to donate to our research. Every donation goes directly to pay for laboratory supplies. If we purchase a container of nutrient media for cancer cells for our experiments, it's about $35 with the shipping cost added in. If you make a donation of $35, you can be sure we're going to be buying cell media to support the research or other nutrients needed by the cancer cells. There are ongoing expenses needed to be able to do more experiments and find all of the precise destructive frequencies of cancer cells. And we hope that you'll help us join our research by making a contribution today and change the future of cancer treatment. And now here is the video in its entirety without my narration. groundwork we laid today through our research will help build a better future for every cancer patient. Fear and pain will be replaced by joy and love. Our work today is our gift to the future.
Oh my God, it's just so inspiring because the potential is just so massive. It's just so massive. So I got a few questions here. As a physics major, first of all, I'm just curious as the protocol for testing or for figuring out the frequencies, because I teach a clinical research class in my program here, and I'm thinking, okay, there's 20,000 frequencies, or if you go into higher frequencies, then because we're not talking sound, we're talking electromagnetics, then there's millions, not even counting decimal points. So, and then if you start looking at two, I mean, it's like I remember you originally said it's like what, 15 months to actually, or 18 months to actually go through and just find. I mean, you just do one at a time?
This was the great problem I faced when we first went to the cancer lab on the East Coast. The director of the lab said, you have, I think at the time, the first trial was 2 weeks. You have 2 weeks to treat these cancer cells and we'll see if something happens. Well, just what you said was the problem, Do you start at 100 hertz or 10,000 hertz or a megahertz, or where do you go? So initially at that time, I went to the internet and some books which had published frequencies by the legendary Royal Rife, right? There are big lists of Rife frequencies for different situations. And I made a list of all of them. And on the first 2 days in the lab, working 12-hour nights, I tested every frequency I had from those lists, looking through the microscope for any kind of change in the cancer cells. And around that time, I became aware of a company, a much larger multinational company called NovoCure. NovoCure started in Israel. They started with $1 billion, that's billion with a B, of private investment. And that was way back in 2009. And since then, NovoCure is now a publicly traded stock with an FDA-approved cancer frequency treatment. I think they have 3 types of cancer now approved. They use a little different technology than we use. They use electrodes that are glued, essentially stuck to parts of the patient. So if you have brain cancer, was the first cancer they were FDA approved for, they shave your hair, and then they glue a series of little electrodes on your head, and a low-powered frequency electric field goes into your brain all day while you wear this device. It's very effective. So after I tried all these, historic Rife frequencies, and I'm sorry to say, I didn't see really any effect on the cancer cells. I was pretty surprised. I thought, well, let's see what NovoCure does. What range are they working in? And at that time in 2009, they were not yet FDA approved, but they had some very good scientific publications. They are very well funded and they have top-notch scientists. So I read that NovoCure considered that 100,000 hertz, 100 kilohertz, was a common frequency to which many cancers were vulnerable. And further, they delineated that in most of their publications, they say between 100,000 and 300,000 hertz is where they've been able to show the cancer is vulnerable. So this is when I began hunting up in that range in 2009 between 100,000 hertz and 200,000 hertz. However, our frequencies are passing through a plasma tube. We don't use electrodes that are attached to the cell flasks or anything. This is a glass ball filled with helium. The gas molecules light up with the electronic signals we send in, and it emanates electric fields, which are pulsed at the frequency that we have control over. So we started pulsing cells up in the NovoCure range around 100 kilohertz. And that's when I first saw something, I was at 197 kilohertz, and I saw my first leukemia cell shatter. And that just blew my mind. It also blew the mind of the lab director. I still have on video a little segment with the lab director. I'm not supposed to show it to the public, I'm sorry to say, but the lab director looks at me on video and he says, I don't know what you're doing, but you're destroying more cancer cells than chemo or radiation, and it's impossible. At the time, he told me, even if you could do this 6 more times and had the same results, I don't know if I can publish this because nobody in my field, and he'd been in the field 25 years, he said nobody would believe it. So to get back to your question, how do we find the frequencies? That's the range we generally work in. And I have kind of limited my hunts between around 100,000 and 200,000. And what I do is when I start with a new kind of cancer that I haven't used, that I haven't tried before, I start at 100,000 hertz because NovoCure has said that seems to be almost a universal number that many cancers are sensitive to. Not all, but many. So I start there, and then I have a whole kind of hunting pattern where in the first week, I'll hunt the odd numbers. Like I might run 100,000 hertz for 2 hours, and then I'll run 120 for 2 hours and 140, or sorry, these are the even numbers. And I go all up to 200. And then the next week, I'll run the odds. I'll do 100, 130, 150, 170 kilohertz, up to 210 maybe. And then I'll compare those results. And that starts to allow me to narrow down, okay, the even numbers work better than the odd. So now I'm going to zero down and narrow the range. And over the course of some weeks, you eventually find that there's a narrow bandwidth in which these cancer cells will really start shattering and slowing down and dying. So it just takes some time.
So I got a clarification question. So you said 197,000, right? And are we talking the pulse rate or the carrier frequency rate?
Now, that's a good question. That's the pulse rate, 197,000 pulses per second. The carrier of the RF is an FCC-approved carrier for this kind of work. 27.12 megahertz is the carrier that is sent into the plasma tube, and then it's pulsed at 197,000 times a second.
Have you ever thought about trying to play with the different carriers?
Yeah, I know in the Rife world, a lot of people think that Rife was using, I think, a 3 megahertz carrier.
Right. And then he did oscillation up and down, above and below that.
Yes, we could make variations in that. Right now, the equipment that we work with is locked in at the FCC-approved carrier, 27.12 megahertz. I think if you had a device that had low enough power levels, you could legally work at a different carrier level. You have to be very careful about what the rules are, what carrier can transmit at what power level. So we may be looking at that in the future. I would actually like to see a device where I can change the carrier at will. So not only am I changing the pulse rate, but I'm also changing the carrier. And then once you find a frequency that works, now try some different carriers and see if that makes a difference. That would be the ideal machine for me.
Cool, cool. Well, I've got a few ideas here. In my book, I talk about how to heal every disease by looking at the body as music. So it's got frequencies, it's got timbres, which are a combination of frequencies, it's got musical interval relationships, and it's got musical flows through each of the 11 systems, right? It's in smooth flow without blockages is the whole deal. So my first thought is, why 2 frequencies? Why not 3? Why not, in fact, why not actually use a device to measure the frequency content of the cancer cells, like the Raman spectroscopy that John Stuart Reed used? And I just talked to 2 doctors at an event just a week ago, and they said there's like light devices that will measure the frequency of the entire harmonic content of a cell scientifically in real time. And then you've got the entire harmonic array, all frequencies, and now you play all of those frequencies to it and explode it 100% of the time.
Yeah, this is really would be an ideal situation. And I have to say, I love the way you describe the metaphor of the human body and its functions in music, harmony, overtones, melody, and all these things. As a fellow musician, this makes absolute perfect sense to me. When I'm doing experiments, in fact, when I was working still as a college professor teaching music for many years, one of my areas of work was composition, writing music for other performers, or in some cases, electronic music for computers. And when people would ask me the last 10 years, what kind of music are you writing? I would say I'm writing music for microbes or music for cancer cells. And the difference is we're hoping they don't like this music very much. That really, you don't want to see your audience get hurt by your music. But in the case of cancer or dangerous bacteria, hey, we don't mind if the audience doesn't survive the concert.
Well, this is where I'm headed. And we're looking at doing the research for this, is to actually use the electron microscope to measure the harmonic content of different cells in each of the 11 systems and measure them at specific nodes based on doctors, so that we find the actual notes of the melody of that entire system, right? And then we use EKG and EEG, and now we got the rhythm, because it's going to be in direct relationship, right, to the heart, brain, and breath, right? And now you've got the melody of each of the 11 systems. So you got 11 songs of you, and you can use needles with frequencies, you can use electromagnetics, you can use micro pads, you could use ultrasound, you could use infrared light, you could use scalar waves and run that song through, and still find the Wiley cells and explode them to break up the blockages, right? But ultimately create that flow. But also, this is the other thing that I think about, and that is to shift to finding what's right in the body and using electromagnetics to resonate the parts of the body into what's right also, besides destroying what's wrong.
Yeah, that touches on an interesting email I received a few years ago. In my TED talk, I mentioned the book, The Rainbow and the Worm, by a scientist who lived in England. Her name was Mei-Wan Ho. And after my TED talk, I tried to contact her by email. And at first, she kind of ignored me completely. But through persistence, she wrote back and she watched my TED talk. And I was very excited about it because her book was really providing the theoretical background. What am I doing? How is it I'm able to destroy these cells? And she started explaining her book about liquid crystals, and cells are liquid crystals. And I knew we could shatter crystals with the right frequency. But in one of our email exchanges, she wrote to me, she said, yeah, that's great. You can shatter cancer cells, but really even better would be find a frequency which will take a cancer cell and revert it back to a normal, healthy cell. Well, that's, of course, the ultimate idea, and similar to what you were just saying, but I have no idea how I could do that. I'm not capable of the type of detailed cellular testing, where you can determine how much ATP is happening or the structure of the ribosomes, or that really would take a huge scientific team. I think NovoCure would have a big enough team to do that, but they're more interested in slowing and destroying the cells. I think the first step in the case of cancer, antibiotic resistance bacteria, any of these things, is to stop the disease from hurting you further, from hurting the patient. As I understand it, the problem with cancer is when it starts to interfere with the functions of the body, that's where the patient becomes really seriously in trouble. So first, we have to stop that cancer from interfering with bodily functions, maybe in the future through shattering so many cells at a time. And then we can encourage better health in the patient, but we have to prevent those most urgent moments, which are a real threat to life.
I've got another idea, which is a project that looks like we're going to get funded for that I think you'll love because as a musician. And that is to use these electron microscopes to map out all frequencies of all 70 trillion cells. Take a little time, right? And we'll have to use AI, but then we'll map out the musical interval relationships between them, because they will be the same. They're different from person to person, and that's why nobody agrees on any frequency for anything, right? Because it's a little bit different. So then but I bet you the musical interval relationships are the same from person to person.
I think you're right. I think there are certainly unique characteristics for every individual, but then I think there will be broad characteristics which all of our bodies would respond to. I just want to touch on this point about electron microscopes, and it makes me recall some audio recordings I've heard of Royal Rife. I don't know if you know, I'm sure everybody's familiar with the great legend of Royal Rife, but some years ago I was able to obtain audio recordings that had been found that he left behind in his own voice and the voice of people who knew him. And one of the things he explains about the electron microscope, which in Rife's day, the electron microscope was just being developed. It was a new thing. And as Rife pointed out, he said the problem with that is everything under an electron microscope is first killed. It's plated with silver. They paint it with a kind of silver paint. They put it in a vacuum where nothing can survive, theoretically. And then they hit it with like 100,000 volts in order to take a picture. So Rife felt that electron microscope photographs were, as he called it, shadowgraphs of deceased creatures. And that's all right if you want to see what the creature looked like or the organism looked like or parts of the cell. But you can't study the function of the cell or see it, how it reacts to a signal in real time unless it's alive. So this is where there are scientists now. I think Stefan Heller is one who won the Nobel Prize for his microscope work, where they are able to now see living cells. For example, I have a friend in France who does work with fiber optics and special microscopes. He can see a neuron in real time, stimulate the neuron, and view and videotape the signal of what's happening at the cellular neuron level in the living animal and in living cells. So now we're getting to the point where the top microscope experts can actually image these things in living cells, living creatures. I'm sure they could do bacteria. How far away could viruses be? And then just what you said, we'll be able to watch their reaction in real time and say, yep, look at that. Write this one down. He didn't like this one, he died. Yeah, that's great.
I love that. So you finally getting microscopes that won't kill the object. Yeah. So the other level that I think about also is as a physics major, we can actually figure out the actual frequency of an overall organ based on density, thickness, and size. There's mathematical formulas for that, right? Mechanical resonance. But there's the material resonance. There's the cellular resonance. There's even the liquid resonances. And then there's the atomic resonance. But then I just saw a whole thing on string theory, where you get down into the parts of the cell. So each level is going to have its own resonant frequency. And I bet you there's a musical interval chord that's very common, that's stable between all those different levels. And once we figure out that chord, that musical interval relationship, then we can just use one test at any level and get the whole array for that organ.
I think that's true. I've seen little snippets of maybe what that would be like in the future through my colleague, Gerard Debost, who is a physicist. He's an expert in plasmas and antenna electromagnetic radiation of antennas. And he has co-authored several scientific papers with us, helping to explain the results. When I've shattered these cancer cells, he writes back to me, he said, okay, use your microscope, take very precise measurements, the diameter of the cells and all this. And then he's done calculations where he's shown several possible resonant frequencies in the cell. The math is way beyond anything I could do, I can tell you that. He's a trained physicist and was a professor for 40 or 50 years in that field. But they're on our website at novobiotronics.com. And if you're a math person, I encourage you to look at it, and you can maybe explain it to me. Gerard explained it to me in layman's terms. Anthony, here's why you're shattering cells. But what's really interesting is people like to think in the past maybe, well, there's one particular frequency that's really the best. I'm not so sure. I think it's more like what you said. There are many parts of the cell which have resonant structures. For example, my colleague Gerard, he said, we believe we have found at least, through our calculations, 3 resonant frequencies for what are called microtubules in the cell. And the microtubules are little wire-like structures that build the cell and hold the little parts of the cell together and make the cell move when it divides and so on. And he said, here's a length we can calculate with a resonant frequency. Here's the width of a microtubule. And also there's a twisting frequency for the microtubules. And he took everything into account, like you said, the damping of the signal based on how much water was within the microtubule, the distance from the plasma tube, and how many watts per centimeter squared. Just fantastic work in there. You know, I'm just taking the cells and running frequencies and filming it. And of course, I do assays. I can tell you what percentage of cells lived, what percentage died. But the mechanism of destruction, it's like you said, many, many frequencies can be helpful.
It's interesting. One thing I wanted to point out, some people might think, oh, well, I've seen people exploding glasses with the voice on YouTube, but they aren't using destructive resonance to do that. If they were using destructive resonance to explode a glass with the voice, we'd be in trouble. It's like, especially in a sound healing class, oh, lost a liver today, right? Oops, there went a kidney, right? Hit the wrong frequency, right? No, it's really binaural beats. When you use the voice, they show it on the glass. They actually find the frequency of the glass and go off pitch a little bit. And the difference frequency is what actually explodes the glass. Now, when they, on the ones you did and you showed, the volume of the frequency is way louder than the voice can do. And that's where you actually, there are videos of them exploding glasses with frequencies of tone generators. And that is destructive resonance, that just has to be much louder, right? I mean, the potential also, I always think of, this is the way I always put it. The more ways you lead a horse to water, the more chances it'll drink. Right? Why not use sound, which is effect? I mean, there's Inside Tech is using ultrasound to destroy cancer. I mean, there's a video from years ago on YouTube, the operating room of the future. Why not use all different levels, even scalar waves, and use them all at the same time? I mean, the potential is really huge. But
let me just mention in regards to resonance, the key thing in a resonant destruction is that the amount of energy you are putting into the system just slightly exceeds what they call the dampening factor. You're sending in a vibration to something, a little bit of that vibration is going to be absorbed and kind of weakened, but there's only so much damping of the sound. Like in the piano, they have dampers, these little felt things that come down and stop the piano strings. So in a vibrating system, each system will have a certain amount of damping of the incoming signal. As long as the power level of the signal you're sending in slightly exceeds the damping factor and you sustain it, the vibration will grow larger and larger in amplitude, and you'll achieve your goal. It goes back to Nikola Tesla, the legendary event he had in his laboratory where he attaches a small physical vibrating oscillator to a steel beam in his lab, and he calculates the resonant frequency for that steel structure of his lab. And the next thing he knows, the building starts shaking, bricks are falling, the story goes, a policeman runs in the lab, what's going on here? And the whole building's about to be destroyed by this little oscillating thing. And Tesla supposedly smashes the oscillator, and the police decide not to arrest him after all for causing all this trouble in the streets. But it's a nice story, but it's good to know. It's like the video of the destruction of that bridge. I mean, when you think of concrete and steel structures and steel cables, you couldn't stand there with your hand and move any of that. And here comes a wind, which is not a hurricane. It's just probably a pretty strong wind blowing across there. And you see the bridge start shaking. And at some point, it causes a frequency in that bridge, and it sustains that frequency long enough to overcome the damping of the bridge, and the bridge is destroyed. So if we can find this, now this is an interesting thing in a parallel to what Novocure, that large multinational company that does frequency treatments of cancer, they stress you do not need high power levels. I think they're saying less than 1 watt per centimeter squared or something like that. I'd have to look it up in the Novocure papers, but you don't have to overpower the system. You need just enough power, sustain at the right frequency, and if you're patient enough, the magic will happen. Or in the case of destruction, that will happen.
Well, here's the next step, and that is to work at the emotional level to get rid of the cause of the cancer in the first place, right? And the work of Jeffrey Martin is he's now using ultrasound on microtubules, where he's found the microtubule frequencies within the cells that you were just talking about within the brain, to bring people into a state of oneness and unity consciousness in the lab every time. If you're in oneness and unity consciousness, there's no more anxiety, there's no more depression, there's no more PTSD, all mental, emotional issues are gone. So now we're talking if we use that level as well, oh my God, the world's about to change.
Yeah, there's no question that nutrition plays an absolutely key role in cancer. I'm not an expert in that, so I leave that to those experts, but I certainly have studied that quite a bit. The Warburg effect and things like that are very much in the news. But also, as you say, it's recognized by doctors that your emotional state, your mental emotional state, has a very powerful effect on your body. You can destroy your immune system, which is used to fight cancer and other diseases, if you have emotional issues, if you're having tremendous stress and things like that. There's no question that good health has to be emotional, mental, physical, nutrition, and all of these things. It's a lot of work to be healthy.
So I have to ask the question, a lot of people are thinking, have you been hassled at all?
Not really, no. Cool. I had one instance in upstate New York, which was I had some concern about my personal safety. And that's a little bit part of the reason of why I moved to Florida. But I had been to Europe, and I met a very famous in Europe, a scientist who was an expert in microscopes. And he did warn me. He said, if you get too close to finding a solution for cancer, which does not use pharmaceuticals, you are going to have two visitors at your door. And he went on to describe, he had these visitors and told me the story. Now, I don't know if he was telling me a yarn, just to have a great story because I had come to Germany to visit him. But sure enough, one day in upstate New York, two middle-aged men dressed in business suits did show up at my front door exactly as he had described. And their behavior was very strange. They knew my name. And when I told them at the moment, I was very busy and didn't have time to talk to them, they later returned and tried to, I don't know what they were going to do, but it's fit the description of this fellow in Germany so well that I felt very uncomfortable about it.
Well, I've been thinking about this a lot and just listening for avenues, because I think it's meant to happen. And, I talked with Jeffrey Thompson, who's really been working in this area as well and thinking about it a lot. And the first thing I think is to get the hospitals on board. The second is Asia and Europe are way more open, right? But, really the deal, though, is once you get FDA approval, it's an open door, right?
Yes, if you have FDA approval, then you are allowed to treat patients with your method, with your technology. Mm-hmm. But the problem is, to get FDA approval, it's costing, I think, a minimum of $10 million to run through the 3 phases of FDA trials.
Boy, that's not a lot for the potential of what this could do, though. That's really not a lot. So say you got, so how much do you think you would need to actually, Well, there's probably all different levels of funding that you could do, but what is the plan for the research in Florida at different levels? What do you see happening, and what's the
Well,
ultimate goal here? The
at the
first stage goal.
I would say, yeah, the first stage goal, I would say our company, which is very small, I'm the president and I'm doing all the experiments and finding the frequencies and doing all the cell assays and all these skills that I learned by visiting cancer labs and having scientists train me in these things. My goal is to leave behind a database of frequencies which we have shown in video and also in scientific papers, the exact data through assays. These frequencies can slow cancer growth and they can destroy cancer. And we've seen it happen at these percentages. We can kill 60%, 70%, or 25% if we use this frequency at this power level. I think if we can leave as much of that information and we give it out to the public for free on our website, that's part of our mission. When we discover a frequency which works, we want to publish it. We want to give it away to the public, let everybody know what it is, get it out there, because we're hoping that the next step will be taken by a larger organization, which would be testing these frequencies, say, with mice. Now, at one point, we priced out the cost of doing a test with mice. I don't know anything about working with mice, so I had to find a company which does this professionally. There was a company in Canada, I think it was maybe 8 years ago or so, just to see what it would cost. They said, well, you can come up to Canada, bring your equipment. We'll give you maybe 10 days, and we'll have 30 mice. And 15 of them, we'll give all the mice leukemia, the exact kind of leukemia you're working on. It's a cell line called K562, chronic leukemia. The mice will contract leukemia. We have experience with this. 15 of these mice you'll treat with your electronics, and 15 you won't. And then we'll see which mice live longer, have a better quality of life. And we'll also then later sacrifice the mice, sorry to say, but that will allow us to see at the cellular level and the organ level, what were your electric fields doing to the mice? Were they helping them somehow? Great. Wow, these are the top experts. So this was about 8 years ago. They said for 30 mice in 2 weeks, you'll need $100,000. So to me, that's impossible. You know, maybe I can buy a house for 100,000, but I can't afford that. And our company operates on a shoestring budget. We can just barely afford to buy cancer cells and the media to keep the cells alive and the materials needed to assay the experiments. So when you start getting up to that level, I think you need an institution, or you need somebody like an Elon Musk, you know, who says, hey, here's $1 million, go do a couple animal experiments. And if those go well, come back and we'll come up with another 15 million and you can start the FDA trial. So I'm thinking we're at the fundamental level. We're going to provide the data. These frequencies slowed and killed these kind of cancer cells. Somebody take it from here. We gave you all the information.
Excellent. Well, we'll just assume it's a done deal.
Wait, write the check. Okay.
Right. It's yeah, check's on the way. I actually would bet that you'll have full funding within 6 months here.
Well, that would be awesome. That would be incredible. Wow. Yeah. I'm ready.
Anything else you'd like to share before we end?
No, it's I guess I would just say, you know, my career was in music. I was a music professor quite some number of years. I love that job. I love music. I'm a musician, orchestra conductor, composer, and of course in the music technology, which is where I got interested in frequencies and cancer. I just want to say, why does it have to be a musician who's finding these frequencies and who's working summer school so he can, you know, buy some cancer cells? And and is working hundreds of hours, doing assays and running frequencies. Where are the cancer researchers? I mean, we've got enough data out there now. If you read the NovoCure papers and their patents, and they have a lot of patents on this too. We don't have any patents. We haven't applied for any patents. Even our most recent paper we released in 2023, it took me years to figure out this new electronic signal using frequency modulation synthesis, which I knew would have a powerful impact on cancer cells. We released the entire program, how to do it, for free in our third paper in 2023. But why isn't MD Anderson doing this? Why aren't all the great cancer centers checking it out? It's now proven, if not through our small company, certainly through NovoCure. I mean, NovoCure is a company with a $27 billion stock cap, right? They're huge. They're all over the world, and they have FDA approvals, and they're in another 12 or 14 or 15 trials. It's the wave of the future. So why isn't somebody else testing to see, okay, the NovoCure technology works great, but it doesn't project over the entire body. Let's look at what Novo Biotronics did with a plasma tube, because we're treating the cells from 2 feet away. We can eventually develop the system, I think, where literally you could treat a room full of people all at once. And I don't think it would be that expensive to test that. But, where are the cancer researchers doing that? They can't get grants for that. They can get grants if they want to use drugs, but they can't get grants for using electronics.
Well, the potential beyond this, it's really, once this happens, then we're going to be looking at all bacteria, all viruses. We're going to be looking at then ultimately resonating everything into its own resonant frequency to sustain health, so things don't actually happen. It's really going to change. It still may be 20, maybe even 40 years, right? But we're talking about an end to a large number of diseases.
That's right. I really, when you watch Star Trek and you see how they have a little machine and somebody broke their arm and 5 minutes later it's all healed. Yeah, I think that's where we're going. And I just want to mention for anybody watching this little laboratory you're seeing around me is computer generated, very beautiful, neat little laboratory. I can assure you that our laboratory is much messier than what you're seeing on the screen. So I thought,
we saw you cleaning it up earlier.
We're scrubbing the microscope over here.
Right. Well, thank you so much for everything you've done and everything you're working on. It's just, I applaud you.
Thank you so much. And it's been a tremendous pleasure to speak to you. Your background in music and physics and healing, I must say, it really resonates with me in a beautiful way.
Excellent. Until the next time, take care.
Thank you.